welcome to our deep dive today.
Glad to be here.
Your interest in the art of persuasion and your choice of excerpts from Thank You for Arguing by Heinrichs suggests a desire for a more serious and academic approach to the topic. So
absolutely,
let's dispense with the usual fanfare and dive right into the core concepts of rhetoric.
An excellent approach. Heinrichs himself emphasizes that rhetoric at its heart is a tool for achieving consensus, not simply winning a war of words.
Right from the start, he distinguishes between a fight and an argument.
Yeah.
He uses this amusing anecdote about arguing with his son over toothpaste to illustrate that difference.
Yeah, it's a clever way to highlight a crucial point. In a fight, the objective is to conquer, to dominate. In a true argument, the goal is to persuade, to guide your audience towards a shared understanding.
And that audience could be anyone, right?
Exactly.
It's not limited to formal debates or courtroom drama.
Yeah. Precisely. Whether you're engaging with colleagues, family members, or even political opponents, the principles of rhetoric can be applied to achieve consensus and understanding.
Now, Heinrichs builds upon Aristotle's classic framework of rhetoric, introducing us to three distinct branches: forensic, demonstrative, and deliberative.
Yep.
I have to admit I'm a bit rusty with those distinctions.
It's easy to get them mixed up.
Yeah.
Forensic rhetoric, as the name suggests, deals with the past. Think of legal arguments, courtroom trials, establishing guilt or innocence based on evidence and precedent.
Okay.
Demonstrative rhetoric, on the other hand, is focused on the present. It's about shaping perceptions, assigning praise or blame, and rallying people around shared values.
And deliberative rhetoric, that's the one that feels most relevant to our everyday lives.
Deliberative rhetoric is all about the future. It's the rhetoric of decision-making, of weighing options and consequences, and ultimately of charting a course of action that leads to a desired outcome. This is where the real work of persuasion happens.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, deliberative rhetoric is the tool we need to navigate those complex discussions where different perspectives and potential solutions are on the table.
Precisely. It equips us to engage in meaningful dialogue, present compelling arguments, and ultimately work towards a consensus that benefits everyone involved.
Now, Heinrichs doesn't just present these concepts in the abstract.
Right.
He weaves in all sorts of fascinating examples from pop culture to historical events to illustrate how these different branches of rhetoric play out in real life.
Yes, and those examples are crucial for understanding not just the theory, but the practical application of rhetoric.
Exactly.
For instance, he uses the example of arguing over music choices as a form of demonstrative rhetoric. It's often less about the specific musical qualities and more about expressing personal tastes and values.
And on the other end of the spectrum, he cites political debates as prime examples of deliberative rhetoric, where the goal is to influence future decisions and shape policies that impact a larger community.
Recognizing which type of rhetoric is at play in a given situation is essential for framing our arguments effectively and targeting them towards the desired outcome.
Now let's move on to what I consider the heart of rhetoric.
Yeah.
Aristotle's three persuasive appeals.
Okay.
Ethos, pathos, and logos.
Yes.
These are the fundamental building blocks of any persuasive argument.
They are indeed. Ethos, perhaps the most subtle of the three, is all about establishing your credibility, building trust with your audience. It's not about boasting or self-promotion, but rather demonstrating your good character, your practical wisdom, and your disinterest.
Those are interesting qualities to consider.
Yeah.
Do you unpack those a bit further? What does it mean to demonstrate disinterest in this context?
It's about showing your audience that you're not driven by personal gain or ulterior motives. You're genuinely concerned with their well-being and advocating for what you believe is in their best interest. Heinrichs uses the example of George Washington, who, despite being a skilled military strategist, deliberately revealed a tactical flaw to enhance his credibility. He understood that appearing too perfect could undermine trust.
That's a fascinating insight. It suggests that vulnerability, when used strategically, can actually strengthen one's ethos.
Precisely. It humanizes the speaker and makes them appear more relatable and trustworthy. In contrast, he points to Bluto from Animal House as a character who, despite being charismatic and likable, lacks the practical wisdom and disinterest necessary to inspire genuine trust.
So it's not just about appearing virtuous.
Right.
It's about demonstrating competence and genuine concern for your audience's well-being.
Exactly. And that brings us to pathos, which is perhaps the most misunderstood and often misused of Aristotle's appeals.
I find pathos particularly intriguing.
Sure.
Because it acknowledges that persuasion isn't solely about cold, hard logic.
Right.
It recognizes the power of emotions in shaping our beliefs and influencing our decisions.
Pathos isn't about manipulating emotions or resorting to cheap tricks. It's about skillfully harnessing the power of emotion to make your argument more compelling and memorable.
It's about connecting with your audience on a human level, right?
Precisely.
Appealing to their hopes, fears, values, and aspirations.
Think of powerful storytelling.
Yeah.
Vivid imagery, metaphors that resonate deeply with your audience's experiences. These are all tools of pathos.
And Heinrichs provides some striking examples to illustrate this. He describes Daniel Webster's tear-jerking speech as a masterclass in evoking emotion to sway an audience.
It's a powerful example of how pathos, when used skillfully and ethically, can move people to action. But it's important to remember that pathos can be misused. Heinrichs cautions against manipulative tactics like those employed in the film Fatal Attraction.
It's a reminder that while emotions are powerful tools of persuasion, they must be employed ethically and with genuine respect for your audience.
Indeed. And that brings us to logos, the appeal to logic and reason.
Logos is often seen as the most straightforward of the appeals, but I suspect it's more nuanced.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Than it appears on the surface.
Logos isn't just about presenting facts and figures. It's about constructing sound arguments, using evidence effectively, and employing logic to support your claims.
And Heinrichs delves into the different types of logic, right?
Yes, he does.
He explains the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning.
Deductive logic starts with the general principle and applies it to a specific case, while inductive logic works in reverse, using specific observations to arrive at a general conclusion. He provides clear examples to illustrate the strengths and weaknesses of each approach.
And then there's this concept of the enthymeme, which I always find a bit tricky to grasp.
It is a rather subtle concept. An enthymeme is essentially a shortened syllogism where a premise is left unstated, relying on the audience to fill in the missing piece of logic.
So it's about leveraging shared assumptions and common ground to make your argument more concise and persuasive.
And Heinrichs, always the master of using pop culture to illustrate complex ideas, offers a brilliant example from The Simpsons. He analyzes Homer's argument about attending church, demonstrating how enthymemes function in everyday discourse.
It's a clever way to show how we often employ condensed logic in our arguments, relying on shared cultural understanding to get our point across.
Exactly. And that brings us to an important caveat in our exploration of logos. While formal logic aims for precision and the elimination of errors, rhetoric acknowledges that logical fallacies are not only common, but can be strategically employed to persuade.
This is where things get really interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
We often think of logical fallacies as something to be avoided at all costs. Yet Heinrichs suggests they can be used effectively in certain contexts.
He's not advocating for the deliberate use of fallacious reasoning, of course. But he does encourage us to be aware of their persuasive power, particularly when combined with appeals to emotion.
So it's about understanding the full spectrum of rhetorical tools, both the virtuous and the potentially misleading. So that we can be more discerning listeners and more effective communicators.
Precisely. And Heinrichs dives into a fascinating taxonomy of logical fallacies, categorizing them into what he calls the 7 deadly sins of logic. He provides examples of each, showing how they can sneak into our everyday conversations, media, and even political discourse.
Let's take a closer look at a few of those fallacies. Just to give our listener a taste of what we're dealing with here.
Certainly. Let's start with the all-natural fallacy, which preys on our tendency to equate natural with good. He uses the amusing example of a donut that boasts all natural ingredients. While the ingredients themselves may be natural, that doesn't magically transform a donut into a health food.
It's a reminder that we need to look beyond marketing claims and critically evaluate the evidence, regardless of how appealing or natural something may seem.
Another common fallacy is the appeal to popularity, which suggests that if many people believe something, it must be true.
Right.
Think of those advertisements that tout products as bestsellers or customer favorites.
The implication is that if so many people are buying it, it must be a good product.
Yeah.
But of course, popularity doesn't necessarily equate to quality or truth.
Exactly. A product could be popular for various reasons, including effective marketing or a low price point, without actually being the best option available.
And these fallacies can be quite subtle, can't they? It's easy to fall prey to them.
They can indeed.
If we're not paying close attention.
And that's why Heinrichs devotes so much attention to exposing them.
Right.
And providing us with the tools to identify and counter them. Let's move on to another essential aspect of rhetoric that Heinrichs covers extensively. Cicero's 5 canons of persuasion. These are invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. A framework that has proven its effectiveness over centuries.
I'm intrigued by this framework. It seems to provide a practical roadmap for crafting and delivering persuasive arguments, moving beyond the theoretical into the realm of action.
Precisely. And while all 5 canons are essential, Heinrichs places particular emphasis on invention, which he describes as the art of discovering the available means of persuasion. It's about identifying the core issues, understanding your audience's values and motivations, and then strategically selecting the arguments that will resonate most effectively.
He uses that hypothetical scenario of crafting a speech in favor of a noise ordinance to illustrate this process of invention.
Right.
It's a clever example because it forces us to think about how to tailor our arguments to a specific audience and context.
Exactly. Should you appeal to the health hazards of excessive noise, or perhaps focus on the shared value of peace and tranquility? The choice depends on your audience and what you believe will be most persuasive to them.
It highlights the fact that effective persuasion requires more than just strong arguments.
Yeah.
It demands a deep understanding of your audience and the ability to adapt your message accordingly.
Absolutely. And once you've discovered the available means of persuasion, the next step is arrangement, the art of structuring your argument effectively.
This is where we start thinking about the overall flow and organization of our message, right? How to present our ideas in a logical and compelling sequence.
Precisely. Think of it as constructing a narrative, a story that draws your audience in and leads them towards your desired conclusion. You need a strong opening that grabs their attention, followed by a clear progression of ideas, and finally, a memorable closing that leaves a lasting impression.
It's interesting to think of persuasion as a form of storytelling. It suggests that we're not just presenting a series of logical points, but creating an experience that engages both the mind and the emotions.
Exactly. And that's where style comes into play. This canon focuses on the language you use, the tone you adopt, and the overall presentation of your argument. It's about finding the right words to express your ideas with clarity, elegance, and impact.
This is where we can really inject our own personality into the argument, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about conveying information, but also connecting with our audience on a stylistic level.
Precisely. Heinrichs emphasizes the importance of using vivid language, metaphors, and even humor to make your argument more engaging and memorable. He even encourages the strategic use of figures of speech, like the chiasmus, to add elegance and impact to your language.
It's a reminder that effective persuasion is both an art and a science. It requires both logical rigor and a certain degree of stylistic finesse.
Absolutely. And then we come to a canon that may seem a bit out of place in our modern world: memory.
I was wondering about that. In the age of PowerPoint and teleprompters, memory seems almost like a relic of the past.
It's true that we don't have to memorize entire speeches anymore, but the principle of memory is still relevant. It's about internalizing your arguments, understanding them so deeply that you can speak about them with fluency and conviction.
It's about having a command of your material so that you can adapt to unexpected questions or challenges during your presentation.
Exactly.
It's about being present and responsive rather than simply reciting a script.
Exactly. And finally, we have delivery, the actual performance of your argument. This encompasses everything from your body language and vocal tone to your pacing and eye contact.
This is where all our preparation culminates, right?
Yes.
It's about conveying our message with confidence, clarity, and passion.
Precisely. Heinrichs stresses the importance of practicing your delivery, honing your stage presence to ensure your message is delivered with maximum impact. He reminds us that even the most brilliant argument can fall flat if it's delivered with poor posture, a monotone voice, or a lack of eye contact.
It's a reminder that persuasion is a holistic endeavor. It's not just about the words we choose, but also how we deliver them, how we connect with our audience on a nonverbal level.
Now let's move on to a concept that Heinrichs calls the identity strategy. This delves into the psychology of persuasion, exploring how we can create a sense of shared identity with our audience to make them more receptive to our message.
This seems like a particularly powerful approach, especially in today's world, where people are often drawn to those they perceive as sharing their values and beliefs.
It is indeed. The identity strategy is all about finding common ground, positioning yourself as someone who understands and empathizes with your audience's perspective.
So it's not about pretending to be someone you're not, but rather about highlighting the shared values and experiences that connect you to your audience.
Exactly. Heinrichs emphasizes the importance of using language that resonates with your audience, using their jargon, their cultural references, even adopting their body language and mannerisms to build rapport.
It's about creating a sense of belonging, making your audience feel like you're one of them, someone who truly understands their perspective.
Precisely. And one of the techniques he discusses for achieving this is code grooming. This involves using language that signals your membership to a particular group, whether it's a professional community, a social circle, or even a political affiliation.
So even something as simple as using specific jargon or slang can create a sense of camaraderie and shared identity.
Exactly. And while this technique can be used effectively to build rapport, it's important to be aware of the potential pitfalls. Code grooming can easily backfire if it's perceived as insincere or manipulative.
It's about finding that delicate balance between authenticity and strategic communication.
Absolutely. Now let's shift our focus back to logical fallacies. We discussed a few earlier,
Right.
but it's worth diving deeper into some of the more common and insidious fallacies that we encounter in everyday life.
I find logical fallacies fascinating in a somewhat disturbing way.
Yeah.
They highlight the ways in which our thinking can be subtly swayed by flawed reasoning,
Right.
even when we believe we're being perfectly rational.
They are indeed a testament to the power of rhetoric, both for good and for ill. And Heinrichs provides a comprehensive list of fallacies, each with its own unique way of distorting our thinking. But let's focus on a few that are particularly relevant and potentially dangerous.
Sounds good. Which one shall we tackle first?
Let's start with the reductio ad absurdum fallacy, which takes an argument to its most extreme and ridiculous conclusion to discredit it. This is often used as a way to shut down an argument without actually addressing its merits.
So it's about creating a caricature of your opponent's position, making it seem so outlandish that it's easily dismissed.
Exactly. And Heinrichs provides a classic example, the argument against raising the minimum wage. Opponents might say, if we keep raising the minimum wage, eventually everyone will be making $1 million an hour and the economy will collapse.
It's a slippery slope argument that relies on exaggeration and fear-mongering rather than sound reasoning.
And speaking of slippery slopes, that's another common fallacy that we should be wary of. It's the argument that one small action will inevitably lead to a cascade of increasingly negative consequences.
This fallacy often preys on our anxieties, making us believe that even seemingly harmless actions could have disastrous consequences down the line.
Exactly. For instance, someone might argue against legalizing marijuana by claiming that it will inevitably lead to the legalization of harder drugs, increased crime, and societal breakdown.
It's a classic fear tactic that often lacks any real evidence to support the claimed chain of events.
And these fallacies can be incredibly persuasive, especially when they tap into our deeply held beliefs and anxieties.
It's a reminder that critical thinking is essential. Even when we're dealing with issues that we feel strongly about, we need to be able to step back and evaluate the logic of an argument, regardless of whether we agree with the conclusion.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the importance of understanding logical fallacies. It's not about becoming a master debater or a logician. It's about becoming a more discerning listener, being able to identify faulty reasoning when we encounter it.
It's about protecting ourselves from manipulation and making more informed decisions in all aspects of our lives. And just as importantly, it's about becoming more ethical persuaders ourselves.
Absolutely. By recognizing these fallacies, we can avoid using them in our own arguments, ensuring that we're persuading through sound reasoning and evidence, rather than through trickery or manipulation.
Now let's revisit the concept of kairos, the art of timing, which we touched upon earlier. This often overlooked aspect of rhetoric can be absolutely crucial for effective persuasion.
Think of Kairos as choosing the right moment to deliver your message, the moment when your audience is most receptive and open to persuasion. It's about reading the room, so to speak, and understanding the context in which your message will be received.
Heinrichs provides some insightful examples of both successful and unsuccessful uses of Kairos.
Right.
He highlights the importance of gauging your audience's mood and emotional state, recognizing when they're most likely to be persuaded.
He uses the example of Stalin, who was infamous for his calculated use of silence during meetings. He would often wait until others had exhausted their arguments before weighing in with his own perspective, creating a sense of anticipation and lending greater weight to his words.
It's a brilliant illustration of how timing can be just as important as the content of the message itself.
He also emphasizes the importance of choosing the right medium for your message.
Right.
A carefully crafted email might be effective for conveying complex information, but it might lack the emotional resonance of a face-to-face conversation.
He even recounts that rather unfortunate anecdote about a Jumbotron proposal gone wrong, highlighting the fact that a public declaration of love, while seemingly romantic, might not be appropriate in every context.
It's a humorous but pointed reminder that we need to consider the context, the audience, and the medium when crafting our message.
Now let's talk about something that's become increasingly relevant in our digital age: the persuasive power of different media. Heinrichs offers some fascinating insights into the unique ways in which various media, from the written word to television and the internet, shape our perceptions and influence our beliefs.
He suggests that the written word, due to its permanence and the opportunity for careful consideration, is often perceived as more logical and rational.
Whereas the spoken word, particularly when paired with visuals, can be more emotionally impactful, bypassing our critical faculties and appealing directly to our hearts.
He also explores the unique challenges and opportunities presented by the internet. On the one hand, the internet allows for the rapid dissemination of information and the potential for global conversations. On the other hand, it also creates echo chambers, where individuals are primarily exposed to information that reinforces their existing beliefs.
And it can be incredibly difficult to convey nuance and tone online, where sarcasm and humor can easily be misinterpreted, leading to misunderstandings and conflict.
It's a reminder that we need to be particularly mindful of our language and the potential for miscommunication when engaging in online discussions.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive, from Cicero's 5 canons to the nuances of logical fallacies and the persuasive power of different media. But before we move on to the final part, I think it's important to acknowledge the ethical implications of what we've been discussing.
I agree. Rhetoric is a powerful tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. It's essential to use this knowledge responsibly, avoiding manipulation and striving for genuine consensus.
Heinrichs reminds us that the goal of persuasion should be to enlighten and empower our audience,
right,
not to deceive or coerce them.
He encourages us to be aware of our own biases and to approach arguments with a willingness to listen and consider alternative perspectives.
He stresses the importance of using rhetoric to foster constructive dialogue and to promote understanding, rather than to win at all costs.
He also reminds us that we have a responsibility to hold our leaders accountable for their use of rhetoric.
Yes.
We should demand more than just empty slogans and divisive rhetoric. We should expect our leaders to engage in thoughtful deliberation, to present evidence-based arguments, and to strive for consensus rather than seeking to exploit divisions for political gain.
It's a powerful reminder that rhetoric, at its best, is a force for positive change.
Yeah.
It can help us bridge divides, build understanding, and work together towards a more just and equitable society.
Let's turn our attention to one of the most complex and frankly concerning applications of rhetoric, the realm of politics. Heinrichs dedicates a significant portion of Thank You for Arguing to dissecting how rhetoric shapes and sometimes distorts political discourse.
It's a timely and crucial topic.
Yes.
Especially in today's world, where political polarization seems to be on the rise and constructive dialogue across ideological divides feels increasingly elusive.
Precisely. Heinrichs argues that modern political discourse has strayed from its rhetorical roots. Instead of using rhetoric to persuade and build consensus, it's often weaponized to demonize opponents and solidify tribal loyalties.
It's like we've forgotten the art of listening,
of
empathizing with those who hold different views, of seeking common ground despite our disagreements. We're so entrenched in our ideological camps that we've lost sight of the fact that we're all part of the same society, facing shared challenges that demand collaborative solutions.
Heinrichs points to the rise of social media as a significant contributing factor to this trend. Social media platforms, while offering new avenues for connection and communication, also create echo chambers where individuals are primarily exposed to information that reinforces their existing beliefs, making it even more challenging to engage in constructive dialogue across ideological divides.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
Social media, intended to connect us, might actually be driving us further apart, amplifying our differences and making it harder to find common ground.
It's a complex issue with no easy solutions. Heinrichs doesn't offer a simple fix, but he does provide some valuable insights and strategies for navigating this increasingly polarized landscape. He encourages us to be aware of our own biases, to actively seek out diverse perspectives, and to engage in conversations with those who hold different views, not with the goal of changing their minds, but with the hope of fostering understanding and finding common ground.
It's a call for intellectual humility, for recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that other perspectives might hold valuable insights, and that engaging in respectful dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable, is essential for a healthy democracy.
He also stresses the importance of holding our leaders accountable for their use of rhetoric. We should demand more than just empty slogans and divisive rhetoric. We should expect our leaders to engage in thoughtful deliberation, to present evidence-based arguments, and to genuinely strive for consensus rather than exploiting divisions for political gain.
It's a reminder that we, as citizens, have a role to play in shaping the nature of political discourse.
Right.
We can choose to reward politicians who engage in constructive dialogue and hold accountable those who resort to divisive tactics.
Absolutely.
We can choose to be informed, discerning consumers of information, critically evaluating the rhetoric we encounter, and demanding better from our leaders.
It brings us back to the core message of thank you for arguing.
Yeah.
Rhetoric is a powerful tool capable of both great good and great harm. It's up to each of us to wield this tool responsibly,
Right.
to promote civil discourse, and to strive for a more constructive and persuasive public sphere.
This deep dive into thank you for arguing has been both illuminating and challenging. It's given us a framework for understanding the art of persuasion,
Right.
the nuances of logic and emotion, and the ethical implications of wielding rhetorical power.
It's our hope that this exploration has equipped you, our listener, with the tools to become a more discerning consumer of information, a more persuasive communicator, and a more engaged citizen in a world where the ability to think critically and communicate effectively has never been more crucial.
Remember, the art of persuasion isn't just about winning arguments or scoring points. At its best, it's about building bridges, fostering understanding, and working together towards a more just and equitable society. So go forth, armed with this knowledge, and use it wisely.